Welcome to the Socialize Strategy. Happy Friday. The topic today is a hot one for me because I'm here because I love podcasting. And what we're going to cover today is details about podcasting. And the reason this is a topic is last time we did a newsletter and a podcast about this topic, we had a lot of detailed questions, and I've since been contacted multiple times from people who are interested in knowing how to podcast on their own. And so I thought this is a great one for a newsletter. And it's also interesting for people who, even if you're just a podcast listener, it'd be curious for you to listen and just hear the details and try and decipher how the podcasts you listen to are done. So there's learning that's always helpful for other facets of life. And I'm also going to answer some questions at the end that are not podcasting related. So you can choose to stay with us today and hang, or you can skip forward and get to the questions at the end. So I'm going to start off before I even get into the podcasting topic and talk about the workshop I have coming up, because we're doing an interview workshop once a month. You know that I do the expert workshops, and we have chosen someone who is very, very, I think, very niche in terms of learning. And her name is Maayan Gordon. She has 2 million followers on TikTok and quite a big LinkedIn following. She's really, really an expert in building community. And when I say that, I mean building a paid community. She's an expert in curating paid communities for creators. So I think this is going to be a really, really helpful one for people who are finding themselves with a larger audience, or even a small audience that is very interested in more content or more detailed, back and forth with the creator. And this is her expertise: platforms, how to do it, how to make it so that it's not debilitating to the creator and becomes a full-time job that they don't have time for, because creating content is already extremely time-consuming. Take it from a creator right here. Do you see the stickies on my desk? If you're watching, I'm going to talk about this. This is my new sticker system for how to get things done. I have a little sticky pad. It happens to be a Mothership sticky pad. I'm holding it up to the camera. And I take one task and I put it per sticky now, and I lay them out and I stick them to an area not where I'm working. So my desk is over there. These stickies are over here, because when I look at them all at once, or I look at them in a list in my notebook, sometimes I'm almost paralyzed and I can't figure out what to do first, how to move through this list. It seems overwhelming sometimes. So what I've done, and this is really a suggestion that Julie made, she suggested doing this electronically, but I like pen and paper. So she suggested you take 3 of the tasks and move them to a separate list and just look at that list until you get through those 3 tasks. So what I have done is taken it to another level. I put all the stickies here. I come over, I pick one, walk over there to my desk, and I focus on the one sticky without looking at all the rest of them. I know that sounds cuckoo, but if for some reason it helps me focus and get that task done without disruption. Because the disruption for me sometimes is looking at all the tasks and thinking, how can I do these things all at once? Or maybe I'm just overwhelmed and then I become frozen, like the character in the movie, that new movie, Inside Out, where the anxiety character has a tornado spinning and she's inside the tornado standing still because she's paralyzed and doesn't know what to do. Somehow, that's how I feel at times. So these stickies, this sticky system has really helped me. Okay, I jumped off the topic, but for good reason. This is a nice organizational tactic in case you're interested and you're someone who does get overwhelmed. But why I'm bringing this up is, if you are a person who's thinking about taking on a podcast, you want to think about all the things you're doing and how that's going to fit into your world. Okay, so back to the workshop, because I remember where I started. Speaking of Maayan and the workshop, she is going to share with us how to build community and how to do it efficiently so that it doesn't become yet a second or third full-time job, but you can also find a way to create a paid platform and offer something that is valuable to valuable to your audience. So I am so excited for this workshop. If you have any interest in this, or even think about how to do more of a community, or if you've been thinking about you want to do a Patreon or something like that, this is the workshop for you. So come and listen. It's going to be released as a podcast, but we are going to record it live, so you can come into the chat, you can ask questions, and I have a lot of questions. So I'm very excited to talk to Maayan and learn all there is to learn. All right, let's dive into the topic of the day, which is podcasting. Woo! First off, I'm going to say, as I started off the newsletter, everyone and their brother's mother are podcasting now, but that does not mean you have to do it. So the first thing you need to do is decide why you want a podcast. Is it going to add value to your audience, to your business? The why needs to be answered because, as you will see in the pros and cons, it is very time consuming and is a big commitment to take on a podcast. So in a previous newsletter, we covered it on a more conceptual level, and that was more thinking about the branding and your concept and all of that. I'm not going to cover that in this podcast today. Since I did that already, we're going to link that one in the show notes, and it's linked in the newsletter. So you can go back and listen to that, which is more broad about topic and thinking behind it and planning and guests versus not guests. So that is less detail oriented and logistical, and that is more broader and big picture. So listen to that episode and get those details, because today we're going to go into detail about the logistics of doing a podcast. If you actually want to do it on your own versus go to a podcast studio, I'm going to talk through all of those details today. And I'm going to tell you firsthand about how we do our podcast, because Julie and I have our other podcast, which is our mother-daughter podcast, which is sponsoring this newsletter today. Yours truly with Helen and Julie, where we do our weekly mother-daughter chats. And we're going to tell you how we do that one versus how I do this one, how we produce them, how we get them out efficiently, because we do those once a week and I do these twice a week. So look at my stickies. It's just another sticky that I have to do and Julie has to do. So we're going to talk about the details of that. But I just want to mention that two things. One is, if you want a big picture, go back to that other episode and listen to it. And number two, if you didn't know, the mother-daughter chats are very fun because we don't talk. We purposely make plan to meet once a week on a Zoom session, and we do sometimes we'll pick a topic. Sometimes it's just a Q&A. I'll ask her questions. She'll ask me questions. And we have an authentic mother-daughter chat every week about what's going on in our life or what troubles us right at the moment or something that we're going through work-wise or creator-wise. Social media, sometimes we'll talk about if we were starting over, what we do different. So we pick a topic. And then what I love about it is sometimes it becomes a therapy session for me and her because we're talking about things that we can't hang up from. So if we start talking and let's say it's not a comfortable conversation for me and her, we can't leave the room or we can't hang up the phone because we're recording and it becomes you're with us. And so we have, I guess, a different purpose. And it's really, really fun and really helpful. It's very different than this podcast. Okay, so that's a little bit about that. And now let's get into some details. Woo! Pros and cons of podcasting. I love how Julie laid this out in the newsletter with the little green check marks for the pros and the little X's for the cons. I love the visual reference. So number one, the pros. Let's start with the 3 pros. If you are an expert in a field, podcasting is a great way to showcase your talent and a way to share it with a broader audience. Great pro. Number 2, if you want to bring on guests, it's a great way to do networking. So you can also broaden your audience this way because you're going to be seen by her audience, that other person's audience, and that other person's going to be seen by your audience. I just spoke to a woman today, which is why I said her, because we're planning our podcast. So I'm planning it. But anyway, when you bring on guests, it's a good way to do networking. And then the third thing is it's a great way to build a deeper connection with your audience, and it cultivates a different type of relationship. So the content that I share here and when I'm talking to you here and I'm in your car or in your kitchen or wherever you are that you're listening is a different type of connection than when I'm doing a tutorial on my TikTok or I'm doing some kind of featured trend or some other type of content. The tone is different, I think. I don't edit it, so I don't chop out and make it more power edited as I would for social media. So it's just more relaxed. Even though I'm going 80 miles an hour over here, I hope it's more relaxed for you. And so it's a different connection. And I also talk about things that I don't necessarily go into on TikToks because I don't record that kind of rambling content on my TikToks. I'm very focused on my content for social media. I shouldn't say TikTok because also for Instagram. I stay focused on whatever the topic is or whatever that trend is or whatever that share is for the day. Here, it's more of a free float, and I kind of really love that. Now let's talk about the cons, because the cons are killer. And they're killer because they could really wreck you if you start doing a podcast and then you're like, geez, I didn't know that this is what it was, and I'm in too deep, and what am I going to do now? And then you kind of just stop. So this is a fact. Most podcasts don't get past 10 episodes. So thank you, Ben, for sharing that fact with me, because I found that really intriguing. Ben Hawes is someone is a comedian whose podcast I was on recently. And when he told me that, I was like, well, that really makes sense, because con number one, podcasting is a large time commitment, more than you think. More than you think. Let me emphasize that. Making a TikTok video, I can power those out. Doing these podcasts, it is more involved. It's different kind of phone setup. It's organizing the thoughts, having bullet point notes. And this is just me doing it without and when I have a guest, add more work, coming up with questions, scheduling the time, figuring out how logistically we're going to do it, making sure they have the notes that I like them to have before we record. So it's all of that back and forth. It's a meeting before the podcast a lot of times, because we'll do a strategy meeting sometimes before a podcast. So time, more than you think. I can't say that enough. I can't emphasize that enough, especially editing and all the things you have to do to get it uploaded. Everything's 5 minutes, but 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 adds up to hours. And then a phone call, a quick discussion, that's 15, 20, 30 minutes. So it's all time. The other con, it is another avenue of content that you have to be generating ideas for. So this is part of the time commitment. Again, it's constant. It's keeping up. Oh my gosh, oh my God, the week's almost over. I didn't plan the next week's podcast, or I didn't plan this topic for the next strategy session. It is a constant flow of content. So if you don't love content creating already and you add more into your life, it's just going to start to take you down. So that is another big con. And then the third con is that marketing is not easy. Let me tell you that I have 1.1 whatever that is, 1.1 million followers on TikTok, 11,000 whatever followers on Instagram. And I don't have 1 million people listening to the podcast. You constantly have to be reminding people you have a podcast. You constantly have to be making teasers. You have to put that out there. And you think, oh, once I put a teaser out there, everyone's going to know I have a podcast. Can I tell you, I go on live sometimes with some of my regular followers on TikTok. I didn't know you had a podcast. Are you kidding me? I don't even know how they could not know I have a podcast. I feel like I don't even know how that's possible. Yet many, large percentage more people, like I would say 90% plus, maybe 95% of my followers do not know I have a podcast. And I am out there. Every day I'm out there. I'm posting every day about something. You would think it would be an easy no-brainer. And trust me when I tell you, can't emphasize this enough. It's even for celebrities to get people listening to their podcast. And I'm not even a celebrity. It's hard. People don't know about it. Julia Louis-Dreyfus had a podcast. I know it was pretty popular, but guess how many? She doesn't have a lot of episodes. As a matter of fact, a celebrity with a whole team of people that can help her make these podcasts and power them out every week. And she still stopped doing it because I haven't seen a recent episode. So do you hear me? And do you feel me? Please know, before you dive in, decide how much you really want it. Decide how much you think you're going to love it. And I will tell you this. I resisted this for a full year. Julie was like, let's have a podcast. Let's do a podcast. And I was like, yeah. I was so not really up for doing podcasting. And quite frankly, right now, I can honestly say it's my favorite thing. I love doing it. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so thankful to her every day that she talked me into doing the Yours Truly one, which then led into this one. And I feel that it's twice a week where I get my thoughts together. I think about my own strategy. The things I tell you, I apply to my own content. So it's really, to me, it's just a no-brainer. I just don't know that it's that for everyone. So I want to make sure that I'm giving you all the information, because sometimes I get so excited and I think everyone should do this. And then I realize not everyone should do this because it's not for everyone. Okay, so let's go on to the tips now. Hardcore exact tips about how we do it, because I'm already 15 minutes in and I have to get to the meat of it. First off, you see this thing? It is a beautiful microphone. I love it. You do not want to try and do a podcast without a quality microphone. It is so worth the investment. This one was $200 and something. I'm going to tell you, I'll put the link so you can find it. I love it. Why? See this little cord here? It goes right into my iPhone. It doesn't have to go into a computer. Most microphones, look into it before you purchase. They will not have a connector for an iPhone or a mobile phone. And this brings me to my next point. But so before I get there, let me just talk about audio. If you're serious, the difference is night and day when you're listening to a podcast that has a good microphone versus not. And if you're a host and your person on the other end doesn't have a good microphone, yes, it's frustrating, but you as the host can still carry the quality. And then the guest it's a little more acceptable when guests have lesser of a good connection, so you can get away with it. If you have a guest that has a great microphone, wonderful, but they're few and far between. I'll tell you that much right now. So microphone, key. Why should it plug into the iPhone? That gets me to my next point. Plan to record video of your podcast. Even if you as a listener are not watching this and you're listening to it, the need for audio is twofold, maybe threefold, but social media. You need social media clips. A lot of people just make the little like wavy lines and they put still photos and they have, you hear the audio. It's just not as good as seeing people's faces in the social media clips. So you've got to plan to record those clips. You've got to plan to record those video clips so that you can post on social media, because it comes back to promotion. That's reason number one. Reason number two is you need to put your podcast on the YouTube podcast platform. I'm not saying YouTube. I'm saying YouTube podcast. There is a difference. Yes, it gets posted to your YouTube channel, but it gets posted in a podcast, and I'm doing air quotes for those of you who are listening, in a podcast playlist on YouTube. And because YouTube now has searching, just like Spotify, you can search for albums, or you can search by artists, or you can search for podcasts. You can search for videos, you can search for podcasts, you can search for categories of things. So you want to be in that podcast category to be discovered. And that's important. And I did make a video on how to upload your first one so that you create the playlist, which is a podcast specific playlist. Because after that, all you have to do is normally upload as you normally would, and then click and add it to that playlist. But the first thing that needs to happen is that podcast specific playlist has to be created. So that is minutia, but it's minutia that you need to know if you're going to do this, because it's really, really important. So now let's get to how you record is depending on how you're going to use your podcast. It depends on a few things. So I'm going to kind of go a little off the rails, but I'm going to read a little bit from the newsletter so I can get it right, but then I'm going to talk about it. So if you were doing a solo podcast like I'm doing right now, I'm recording this directly onto my iPhone. I used to do it in Zoom. I don't know why, because I was by myself. I can now record because I have this cord that goes into my phone. That is the money right here, the cord. These microphones do not all work with iPhones. They're not all mobile friendly. So you want to get one and do the research and get one, because if you want to record on your phone, you want to be able to use it and plug it directly into your phone. Second thing about it is I'm recording horizontally, but I am sitting way back from my phone right now because I want to be able to cut this vertically and not chop myself to be like this big in the frame. So I'm recording so far back that right now my hand can't even reach the phone. I would have to get up to stop the video. So you needed to have it at least an arm's and a half length from you away, so you're wide enough so that you can then slice the frame down to get this for social media vertical. You can, of course, make a little cropping, and then you can put a color on the top and the bottom, your branded color, and you could do something like that. But it's really helpful if you record a little bit further away. Okay, detail. Second way you can do it is you can record at a studio. If you have the money, if you have the resources, and you want to go to a podcasting studio, they have cameras, they have microphones, they set it up, boom, boom, boom. And then they're going to give you files of video, and someone's going to have to edit it. So that's money and or time if you know how to edit. And when they record on their machines, their cameras, those aren't phones. So there's camera files. You're going to need probably a proper editor to actually edit that. And Julie and I were doing that at first, but oh my goodness, we were making such an investment in it, and we realized that it's not a sustainable way to do it, because we're not sponsored by, whatever, Aritzia or iPhone over here where we can spend money on our podcast. So I highly recommend if you want to DIY your podcast and you want to have guests, you can record with Zoom. So that's the third way that I'm going to tell you. It could be Zoom, it could be Riverside, it could be Teams, however you want to record. But you want to be able to be on and talking to your person directly into the computer. So that way you can have a real conversation and you don't have to have a debilitating editing situation. You can just record it in real time. In theory, you can post it. I will tell you, when I record my podcasts on Zoom, and because of the way Zoom records in gallery mode, we're far away from each other. Somehow the file itself is really wide and there's a lot of space between. So what I do, because I'm quick and I do it in CapCut, I layer them and I crop them and I push us closer together and I make it a better looking frame. Do I have to do that? No. Do I want to do that? Hell yes, because I'm a quality nerd. So I like to do it right. But the quality in general of a Zoom video is thumbs down, not good. So I do it because for that need, it's more important for me to have ease for my guest and ease for myself for editing instead of the other way, which I'm going to tell you now, if you have a guest, is to have both people recording into their phones. Then you connect on a Zoom so you can see each other, but each person has a cord and is recording with a microphone into their phone and creating two phone files. But that, again, requires an editor because they have to put those two phone files together and cut back and forth from person to person to person. Okay, so that's the three ways. I should say, I'll give you a fourth way, just because Riverside, for example, if you record in Riverside, you can edit right in Riverside. It's the same thing as recording in Zoom. And in my case, I take the Zoom and I put it into my phone and I just edit it. This has editing right in the platform. So I know that a bunch of the podcast platforms have that directly, where you can record your podcast and then I guess that has an editing thing built right into it and you could chop things out. So if you need a platform like that and you want to handle your own editing and you're not comfortable doing the files, sending them to your phone or sending them to another editing platform and editing them, that's definitely an option. All right, so now I gave you 4 things. Should we recap? I'm going to do it quickly. Number 1, record directly into your cell phone. And you can actually edit that or not. A lot of times I just press record and all I have to do is trim the beginning and the end and I just power through the whole thing. On occasion, somebody will interrupt me or I'll get a phone call or whatever and I have to pause and then I have to put the file together. All right, so 1, record on the phone. 2, record, what was 2? I forgot 2. I don't know what order I did it in. Okay, 1 was the phone, 2 was a studio, 3 is on a Zoom call where you can record on a Zoom call, and 4 is to record in a platform like Riverside where you can edit right in the platform. So you have 4 different ways you can approach it depending on the goal and how much work you want to put in post-production. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. The next topic is pick a platform. So no matter where you record, you need a place to post it. And when you post it, it will then feed out your RSS feed, will feed your podcast out to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever all the podcasts are listened to, where you listen to your podcast. So all the platforms will then farm them out. There's different steps you have to take sometimes in a platform to execute that, but each platform will tell you how to do it. Julie and I use Transistor for both of our podcasts, and we'll put the link in the newsletter, the link in the show notes, transistor.fm. I like it because it's simple. The analytics are simple. It's I think we pay, what is it? I think it's $21 a month when you count, because I have the transcription service attached to it as well. It's like $5 added or something. It's about $20-something a month, $24 a month. Most of them are about the same. And you can see your analytics. You can see how many people are listening. You can make sure the transcripts are there. It gives you an option to put a YouTube link so that if someone goes to your podcast homepage, you have a nice homepage for your podcast. It's like a little website. And when you go there, you can choose. The person can go right to the YouTube and watch it because that's linked right in there. Or they can just click on one of the podcast platforms, or they can play it right on the website. So I don't know, it's simple. You know, when you're familiar with something, you just love it. So I love it. I have nothing bad to say about Transistor. It's like bingo for me. I love it. And Julie uses it for the Yours Truly podcast. So we both tag team on our podcast, the workload of the podcast, because as I mentioned, workload. Okay, so that's that. And then lastly, I did already talk about, not lastly, two more things. I did talk already about posting to YouTube and how that works, because it is important. You're getting views there, you're getting seen there, you're getting discovered there. So you must record the video of the podcast. And there's a client that we've worked with, Stephen and I. Stephen's a podcast editor. If you need a podcast editor, we have a podcast editor for you, so reach out to me. But so Stephen is editing podcasts for clients, and one of them does not want to be on camera. The CEO of the company does not want to be do an on-camera podcast. So they are doing instead still photos to represent the voices of the people that are talking, which I think is also was a great suggestion. And it's a way to do it so you can actually have a video on YouTube, but maybe you don't want to be worried about doing, let's say, your hair and makeup like what I do. No, I don't do hair and makeup to get ready for this. That's the funny part. But if somebody was worried about that for on camera, then they don't want to be recording video. So in that case, maybe still images can work. That's just a thought. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the promoting thing. So I think I don't know if it's a misconception, but it's the idea that people think, oh, I'm going to make a podcast and just thousands of people are going to listen to it. I'm going to be discovered in the podcasting platforms. No, I'm sorry. Even if you have a gigantic social media following, getting those people to convert over to listening to you on a podcast is a whole different beast. It's just, I can't even explain how it's not what you would think. But I found from posting on LinkedIn, I got some podcast viewers, because people on LinkedIn tend to be in that corporate world of they're either driving, traveling, whatever, and maybe they're more likely to listen to a podcast than they would even to scroll on social media. So thinking about the different avenues of how you would promote your podcast is so important. Thinking about who, if you're going to do guests, who you can have so that you can cross promote. It's just not as easy as you would think that, oh, thousands of people are just going to come and listen to your podcast. Okay, this is not going to happen. So that is the overview, probably in great detail, maybe greater detail than you expected, or if not enough, feel free to ask some questions. You can respond to the newsletter with some questions. And there is a question submission form at the bottom of the newsletter, and that's a helpful way to do it so we can keep track of them so we don't lose your email. Feel free to hit that and then respond with any thoughts you might have or any questions you might have on podcasting, or any thoughts if you think I missed something. There's 3 questions. One of them is podcast related, so I'll start with that one for today, and then I'll get into the other 2 questions. The first one, how can I keep a podcast going when I'm traveling? So there's a couple of things you can do in this case. Number one, you can use, which I did recently when I had to travel to Croatia. I took just a little mobile microphone with me, and I set myself up in a hotel room. I set up my phone, and I used my mobile microphone holding it to my mouth closely. Because if you wear it, it's not going to give you the same quality sound as if you were close to a podcasting microphone. So I held it, and I did have decent quality because Saramonic, who I love, makes really good microphones, and they have a really nice mobile one that I held right up to my mouth, and I had a really nice quality podcast for when I was traveling. I didn't overstress about what my background was, where I was, what I looked like, none of it. I focused more on the audio, and I just recorded the video just because that's what I do for YouTube, and I tried to make my hotel room look as best as I could for the time being that I was recording. You can keep going. That's one way to answer it. And the second way is you can do a hiatus. You can say, this is the last episode in season 1. We'll be back in a month with season 2 or season 3. So you can take a pause. Your audience will understand if you're taking a pause in your podcast. I have not yet done that with the Socialize podcast because the newsletter goes every week. So we power out the podcast to go with the newsletter. So so far, it's one gigantic season 1. So thanks for being here. Next question for today. How can I put something on a scene when I'm talking in a video? Okay, I have talked about overlays a lot of times before, and I did do another tutorial this week to show, because you can do an overlay and you can have something in the scene in a small space, or you can have that increase the size of that thing so it covers up the scene completely. And also, if you don't want to do overlay, you can do the cutout feature on CapCut, cut yourself out, and you can put your overlay behind you. So it's an underlay in that case, but you can put that behind you, and you can make yourself smaller in the corner. So there's three basic ways to have something on the scene when you're talking. And 2 of them involve an overlay, and 1 of them involves cutting yourself out, which is to be done in CapCut. TikTok does have an overlay function, but if you're an Instagrammer, you can do all 3 of these things right in CapCut. So you can watch my tutorial for that. I'll try and link it. It should be posted by the time this releases. And then this is the last question, which I have to address, because every single time I open up my phone on TikTok now, I'm getting this damn alert, which says something about iPhone out of storage. Let me see if it comes up when I tap drafts or when it comes up. Yep, right there. When you tap drafts, at the bottom, it says almost out of phone storage, post or delete drafts to free up space. Why is this happening? My phone has plenty of space. I do have a lot of drafts, but, oops, my TikTok's playing now. Whoops. I do have a lot of drafts, but I deleted a bunch of them, and the message is still there. So I'm going to say, if you're seeing this message, don't panic about it. I think it's a TikTok glitch. You can delete some drafts, but the message is just going to keep on coming. So my advice is move on. Ignore it. That's the only advice I have, because there's no real solution. You could probably empty your drafts and you might still get this message. I have a feeling it's just a glitch in the universe. Ooh, okay, that's it for today. I'm going to just remind you again, Yours Truly podcast, Yours Truly with Helen and Julie. We'll put a link here in a little advertisement, since we're sponsoring today's newsletter. I do have a link for you for Transistor if you want to look into that as a platform for your podcasting. If you want to try it, take your hand at it, go for the 10 episodes, see if you can get past it. That could be your goal. And then the last 2 reminders are, number 1, the webinar with my Jan Gordon, which is going to be about community. So I'm going to put that also in the show notes. And a reminder about the fun Jamaica trip that I'm going on in May. I'm not going to talk about that on every podcast, but maybe once a month I'll mention it now, so that I don't want to do overkill. It's like 5 months out, but I also am supposed to talk about it because they invited me and they said, please mention it when you can. That's my notes for today. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the holiday. I hope you're going somewhere. I'm not going anywhere major, but I'm going to the beach. I'm going to relax, and we're going to have Jonathan with us for the weekend. Tommy and Jenna are going to be there. I would say usually Julie might have stayed and joined us, but they have another wedding, so they're off to Mexico City for a wedding. So Julie's not going to be with us, and Stephen either. So you guys have a fun time at the wedding if you're listening, and everyone else have a great weekend. And I'll see you next Tuesday. Have fun.